Back to diapers. The air seemed to ripple outwards from the book, as though it were the source of a gas leak. The two mommies were truly frozen, unblinking, unflinching. The same was not true for Brian and Rachel. They could still move all right, but they were nonetheless frozen where they were, unable to move out of terror. What could possibly be happening now? Already they were sitting on potty chairs, buck naked, watching kiddie cartoons. They shuddered to think this could get any more embarrassing. As the ripples swept out with the first changes they saw came to the toys on the floor. Dollies and Lego blocks seemed to implode in on themselves, then morph into simple plastic letter blocks, clown-faced rattles and other baby toys. Something large began to grow out of the floor, expanding like a fast-growing flower until it snapped into shape, a playpen. The wavy air reached the two adult toddlers next. Brian leant back on his potty as he felt strange energy beginning to flow over his bare skin. As he tried to push away as though his space was being invaded by an aggressive puppy, as though simply scooting back and looking away could stop it, the potty chair beneath him began to melt away. He fell to his bottom with a thud as the potty disappeared into the carpet as though swallowed by quicksand. The potty gone, Brian scooted back on his bum, his limp penis brushing across the carpet as he tried to escape the unknown forces assaulting him. Rachel abandoned her potty as it too sunk into the carpet, though it felt plenty firm under her bare soles. It was no use running though, for the process seemed to gain speed with every passing second. The energy passed over and through the duo. Rachel's mouth tingled, her gums aching as several teeth receded up into them, leaving nothing but bare pink gums in their place. Her dark hair turned lightened several shades, not going blonde, but certainly not as dark as before. It also became thinner, wispier as her pigtails vanished. Brian grasped at his mouth as he too lost several teeth. Then he was distracted by something more concerning even than that. His legs felt strange, fatigued and twitchy. He rubbed at his calves, trying to see what was happening to them, though they looked no different. With a thud, Rachel dropped to her bottom beside him, looking particularly surprised. And Brian knew, she hadn't meant to sit down at all, her legs had simply given out. Her bared bottom didn't smart for long though. A second after she hit the floor, a crinkly white diaper appeared out of thin air, wrapping itself around her loins. Rachel hoped a shirt would materialize the same way, but she had no such luck. As the ripples seemed to dissipate, she was left sitting on the floor in only a diaper. As a stillness returned to the air, the mommies began speaking again as though nothing had happened. "But what can you do? They grow up so fast," Sarah declared. "Yep, my little Megapoo is just crawling up a storm these days. Why, she'll be walking all on her own in no time. How cute," Sarah gushed. From the way they were talking, Brian guessed he and Rachel were now little more than infants. Aside from the playpen and baby toys, the room hadn't changed that much, but he guessed his bedroom would be much different now. MMMPH, Rachel grunted, trying to stand up but finding her legs uncooperative. Brian shook his head knowingly. He wasn't foolish enough to try that himself. He could feel the weakness in his legs. He knew somehow he'd lost the ability to walk. Rachel dropped onto her stomach with a bang, painfully landing on her bare breasts. She grunted and sulked, sticking her diapered bum in the air and showing off the puffy white garment decorated in a pattern of light green rattles and teddy bears. Amanda and Sarah looked over at their babies and shared a chuckle at the little girl's difficulties. Then Sarah clucked her tongue at Brian. "Well, what happened to your diaper, little mister?" she asked rhetorically, heading over to her boy. "Did you wanna get all nakey-wakey? Did you?" she cooed in baby talk to him. Brian shook his head and tried to quickly explain. "No, I didn't wanna go nake. Bwan quotes." As soon as the words left his mouth, Brian knew they had come out all wrong. He'd thought the normal words in his head, but the messages got garbled on the way to his mouth, and then his tongue seemed to be all clumsy and tricky to control. Before he could correct his poor diction, his mom was picking up a big pack of diapers and addressing Amanda as though he hadn't said a thing. He was being completely ignored. "He's such a little nudist these days," she told Amanda. "I think I'll have to start taping his diapers onto him. He gets his hands on the tabs and next thing I know there's a rip and he's streaking through the mall with his weenie hanging out." Oh, I'm sure Meggie will be just the same once she figures out how to get those dear pies off. Could be, Sarah agreed, setting the diaper box on the floor and opening it up. Brian looked at the side of the box. It showed a picture of a young man around his age lying on his back in nothing but a diaper and pulling at the toes of both feet as he waved his legs in the air. The man had a glassy-eyed soporific look on his face, grinning like a contented idiot as he played with his feet. Above him the brand name Huggies was emblazoned across the package. In the right corner were the words, "Crawling Early Walking Boys 16 to 22 years." Sarah drew out a big white diaper with blue teddy bear prints. She unfolded the bulky garment while Brian tried to calm down and concentrate on speaking properly. He found that if he was less excited it was easier to control his tongue properly. "Mama, I don't wanna be," he started, speaking slowly and clearly. "I know you want to be naked, honeybun, but this isn't our house and you can't be making pee-pees and poo-piss on our friend's carpet," Sarah cut him off. Brian reddened with frustration. He wasn't saying he didn't want to wear a diaper, he was trying to tell her he didn't want to be naked. Why wouldn't she let him finish what he was saying? Sarah knelt at his side and gently pushed him onto his back on the carpet. "Okay honey, don't squirm while I get you dressed. Be a good boy for Mama," she urged him in that awful high-pitched voice. "I won, Mama," Brian assured her, nodding. He was determined to show her he wasn't some stupid little baby. Sarah lifted Brian's legs, slipping her head between them and placing one calf on each shoulder. Then she used her body weight to push Brian's legs upward, lifting his butt in the air just long enough to slip the new diaper under his butt. She grabbed some lotion from the bag beside her, squirting it into her palm and then reaching forward. Brian's eyes widened and he felt a flush of shame as his mother's hands began to rub his exposed penis and all around his crotch. This was an all-new height of shame for the young man. To have his own mother actually manipulating his former manhood, simply to keep it clean when he inevitably wet and messed his new diaper, was so demeaning it made Brian want to cry like the baby he was being treated as. "There we go, that will keep Mama's whittle guy nice and comfy in his dear pie," she told him as her hand slipped under his raised bottom. Brian closed his eyes and sniffled as he felt the cool greased fingers slip up and down his butt. He felt so violated, so powerless. He couldn't help but wriggle his legs, wanting to pound his heels on the floor. "Honey, don't squirm. Remember, you promised Mama you'd be a good boy." "I'm a bad boy," Brian squealed, the tears starting to escape the corners of his reddened eyes again. "Then show Mama how you can hold still," she replied. Brian forced his legs to be still and Mama's hand left his bum at last. Then she had a bottle of powder and she was dusting his pee-pee and bum with it. The smell of the baby powder was overwhelming to his senses. It seemed they were becoming keener. Every touch, every scent was magnified. He could feel every cool fleck of powder settling on his pee-pee and bum. Mama put away the powder and began to take the diaper closed, finally giving him a speck of privacy. It was a big, bulky diaper and it came all the way up to his belly button. But it also forced his legs out slightly. As he moved them he could feel the crinkly material brush across his smooth hairless thighs. Once it was fully secured, Mama let his legs go and then directed his arms up, slipping a red t-shirt over his head. It wasn't like his earlier t-shirt though. It had writing on it he couldn't read, but the real change was its length. This shirt was only half length, not quite reaching his belly button. Dressed in this baby tee and diaper he felt like Tommy Pickles on Rugrats. As he turned onto his knees and attempted to stand, the t-shirt left his tummy uncovered. Brian was beyond this small shame though. He had experienced so much worse now that being half-clothed no longer fazed him. In fact, it no longer even bothered him that his legs were totally exposed or that he was barefoot. All that mattered was he proved to himself that he was at least still able to stand on his own 2 legs like a man. He just wanted that one small dignity to be left. It took all his strength to force his knees to lock into place, his legs straightened. They felt weak all right, but more than that he felt like he was standing on a rolling, pitching ship's deck. His toes flexed and his knees wobbled as he tried to keep his balance. He was forced to hold onto the couch for support. Rachel was staring up at him, chewing her thumbnail anxiously, slowly slipping more and more of the digit into her mouth. The mamas were beaming at him like he'd made a great accomplishment in simply standing up. "Look at that, Sarah, your little one is quite advanced for his age. 21 years old and he'll be walking around the place on his own in no time," Amanda commented. "Yes, he's quite good at standing and he can even walk a bit as long as I hold his hands. But he's not quite ready to tool around on his own yet." "I can walk," Brian blurted out indignantly. "Well, he certainly has the right attitude," Amanda noted. "And he's quite the little talker, isn't he? Very advanced for his age. Oh, he's gonna be quite the chatterbox pretty soon, no doubt about that. Most grown-ups have a hard time understanding his babbling, but Mama knows what her whittle guy wants. Mamas can always understand their baby's language. He seems eager to do a little walking. You want to give him a hand?" "Yes, he could use the practice. But get ready for some crocodile tears when he falls down," Sarah warned. Brian pouted. He hated the way they talked about him like he was deaf. Here they were mocking him while he stood right in front of them, and they went on as if he couldn't understand a word they said. He was determined to show them he could do more than walk with someone holding his hand. He'd just been running around the backyard minutes ago. He would force his muscles to work properly. Mama came up beside Brian, smiling as she took his hands off the couch and into hers. She pecked a kiss on his cheek, smiling as she looked him in the eye. "Okay, honeybun, let's go for walkies." Brian felt even more off balance as Mama led him away from the couch. She walked backwards, keeping a firm grip on his hands and her eyes locked on his, smiling encouragement the whole way. Meg's Mama was also smiling and nodding her praise as she watched the walking lesson. Rachel didn't seem impressed at all, of course. She just sulked on the floor, now fully sucking her thumb. Walking was tricky indeed. The change wrought on Brian's body by the last shift had done a number on his abilities. His motor skills had taken a very serious hit. With each step his leg jerked upward rather than smoothly lifting. He stepped too high, all his movements exaggerated, awkward. His foot would then slap down hard, toes turning inward. With each step his body swayed left or right, pitched forward or slipped backwards. Only his mother's firm grip on his outstretched arms kept him standing upright. "There we go, lift those toeses, get them up and set them down," she directed. "Very good, Bree. You're making walkies just like a big boy. Mama is so proud." As she praised him, Brian felt an odd sense of accomplishment. Sure, it was silly to be proud of something so basic, but given the problems with his body, this was an achievement. He found himself beginning to smile, even to giggle with giddy pride. Mama led him all across the room and he didn't fall down. That made him feel so big, walking just like Mama. For a second it didn't even occur to him how ridiculous that thought was. Then Mama set his hands on the door jamb by the entry the dining room. She brushed a hand through his hair again and gave him a big smooch on his forehead. "You did very good, honey. Mama knows that was tough for Boy, and she's glad you tried." Mama started to walk away, but Brian had to follow her. He'd made it this far, surely he could do a couple steps on his own. Tentatively he let go of the jam and took a furtive step forward. His legs wobbled dangerously, but he continued. He swung his right foot past the left, going for his second step, but as it set down his foot rolled on its side and his knee gave way. Next thing he knew, his arm and cheek were slamming into the carpeted floor. Out of shock, Brian began to wail. Falling like that was so disorienting, he didn't know what was going on. He didn't just sniffle and tear up, this time he was bawling his eyes out, unable even to see straight. Mama spun around as soon as she heard the thud of his body hitting the floor. He'd only given a couple shrieks before she was at his side, pulling his lanky 6-foot form into her lap and cuddling her arms around him. Sure, there, little guy. It's okay now, Mama's here. I got you and you're all safe, she sung to him, rocking gently back and forth. Brian wanted to stop, but once started it seemed out of his control. His emotions were on a roller coaster ride now, impossible to keep a hold on. He sobbed even as Mama's warm arms cuddled him close and he felt her kisses pecking the top of his head. Mucus poured from his nose and dribbled over his lips. Where'd you get hurt, sweetie? Where are those bad boo-boos? Mama asked, looking over the young man's face and arms. Did they hurt you here? Is this the bad boo-boo? She asked, gesturing to his right arm. Let Mama kiss them all away then. See, Mama kisses them and makes the boo-boos all better, she told him, kissing his arm and cheek. Slowly Brian felt his emotions coming back under control. It had been like trying to stop a speeding train, getting them in check, but he felt much better now that Mama kissed away the hurt. In fact, it was the surprise of falling more than any actual pain that had made him cry. As his tears dried up, he realized there wasn't actually any pain. This made him feel even more foolish. That's better, isn't it, Brie? You feeling better now, baby? Brian nodded, still sniffling a bit as he said, so we ICWY Mama. Oh, that's okay, honey. Don't worry, Mama knows what baby needs when he falls down and goes boom. Baby just needs kisses on his bad old boo-boos. That makes them all better because Mama has magic kisses. Brian giggled despite his shame. Somehow the idea of his Mama having magical kisses was both ludicrous and wonderfully comforting. On an intellectual level he knew that was made up, but somehow it seemed perfectly possible to him on an emotional level. He trusted everything Mama told him without question. His tears dried up and a smile on his face. Mama lifted Brian out of her lap and set him on his butt on the floor, getting him a few toys to play with while she went to prepare the baby something to eat. Brian wasn't interested in the silly red and blue letter blocks Mama had left him, so he got onto his hands and knees to crawl over to Rachel. Creeping about that way really was much easier and safer than trying to walk. As much as it demeaned him to crawl, he didn't want to have another meltdown like a moment ago. The idea of walking now really scared him. Wackhell, you okay? He asked his friend as he reached her side again. Rachel was still sitting right where she'd been the whole time, sucking her thumb vigorously in an apparent daze. She hadn't moved or said a word since the last transformation. She wasn't even making any attempt to cover up her bare breasts. Brian was worried that either the transformation had warped her mind or it had simply snapped under the strain. The diaper-clad young woman turned to him, showing her sorrowful eyes. They stared at each other for a long moment before she removed her thumb with a pop and mournfully announced, I done got teeths. Rachel was pouting and looked on the verge of a meltdown herself. Brian shook his head and corrected her quickly. You got teeths? Can you fee em? She opened her mouth wide, revealing a mouth with several gaps where teeth hadn't popped through the gums yet. Look it, they all gone. Just some of em. Most. It's okay. We gonna be okay. Rachel shook her head, determined things would not be okay. How come we can talk good? Sound all dum-dum. Brian shrugged. Cause a DA book. It do Edwarding. Rachel looked angry now, very angry. She turned to a toy playset nearby and bashed it with her fist. The toy rattled and made several dinging noises. It was brightly colored and plastic, of course, covered in bells and things that could be turned and twisted, knobs and levers. As soon as she'd hit it, Rachel found her attention drawn in by the bright, noisy toy. She pulled at a blue tab sticking out of the contraption and it immediately produced a satisfying ripping noise. She hit the bell next, then twisted a multicolor dial, resulting in a crunching sound. It was so engrossing. As she played with the toy, Brian crept up next to her, bopping the bell experimentally. When it rang, he too smiled mischievously. Soon they were each banging away at it, twisting and pulling the gizmos, having a grand old time with the playful baby's toy. They barely even noticed when the mamas reappeared from the kitchen. "Well, I'm sorry to put an end to the fun, but it's time to fill those tum-tums up with nummy-nums," Sarah announced. Brian didn't really want to put aside the toy. He was really having fun with it. It made so many cool noises and, wait, cool noises? Brian blinked in astonishment as he reflected on what he'd been doing. He was a college student, he still looked like one, aside from his teeth and hairlessness. Yet he'd been happily playing with an infant's toy for going on 5 minutes, if not longer. In fact, he'd been so engrossed he'd actually lost track of time. And from the look of Rachel's face, she was having a similar revelation. Getting messy. Before he could ponder his strange behavior anymore, Brian felt Mama's arms scooping under his own and lifting him off the floor. How Mama was strong enough to lift him onto her hip and carry him was beyond his understanding. He could only assume it was the work of the book, altering certain aspects of the laws of physics. Mama carried him into the kitchen, where 3 high chairs were lined up along the counter. They were huge chairs, of course, built to accommodate college-aged men and women. Each was white with a footrest and a detachable tray. As Mama set him down in one of them and strapped him in, he got a look at Meggie for the first time since their latest transformation. Their former friend was dressed just as Rachel was, in nothing but a diaper. She was sat on the linoleum floor of the kitchen with her back against the baby-proofed cabinets with a pot upside down between her legs, another one on her left foot and a couple smaller ones scattered across the floor nearby her. She was drumming away at the pot between her legs, making a cacophony of sound, while chewing on the black plastic handle extending from the pot. Amanda was busily preparing food for the babies while her daughter banged away, legs jerking this way and that, a line of drool running down her chin and dripping to her bare boobs. Sarah locked Brian's tray into place, rubbing his cheek lightly. "Okay, Brie, we'll have you all fed in a jiffy. Let me just get your little friend Rachel to join you for dinner." A minute later she returned with Rachel on her hip and set her down in the chair on Brian's left. Amanda scooped Meggie up from the floor and carried her to the remaining high chair. "Mama, Baba, Gabu." Meggie babbled as her mama strapped her in. "Yes, sweetie, you'll be having a nice milky baba very soon," Amanda assured the eager girl. Brian was disappointed to see that Meggie's mind had been reduced along with her motor skills and speech. She continued to babble cheerfully and blow raspberries or spit bubbles throughout their meal. She seemed completely unconcerned with staying clean while eating, not caring at all that much of her meal ended up on her body instead of in her mouth. Not that he and Rachel were doing much better though. The Gerber's baby food being spooned to them from orangey glass tubs with blue labels, tasted disgusting. Not only that, it looked repulsive too. Brian forced himself to swallow the gook, but Rachel gagged and spit it back up several times. It wasn't long before she had it all over her chin. Unable to stomach any more, she began to twist her head back and forth in an effort to avoid Sarah's attempts to feed her. The result was some very messy cheeks as well. "Ugh, no more." Rachel whined, but to no effect. "Come on, sweetie, eat it all up like a good girl," Sarah encouraged her. When this failed, she tried pretending to try the gook herself, proclaiming, "That's yummy yummy," and rubbing her tummy in mime for the girl. Rachel didn't believe it for a second, of course. She sulked and closed her lips tight, refusing to allow another spoonful of the sludge into her mouth. She was already despairing at how filthy she was from the meal, especially compared to Brian. By accepting the feeding, he'd kept himself relatively clean. The Looney Tunes bib tied around his neck to protect his t-shirt was barely even necessary. Rachel and Meggie didn't have bibs because they had no shirts to need protection. Instead, their bare chests had both gotten good and messy. Though Meggie wasn't as concerned as Rachel, she was busy painting her chest with the spilled food like it was her new favorite game. Well, at least you did a good job, Brie, Sarah told him, though mostly for Rachel's benefit. Now you get to have a treat, she said, beaming as she put a piece of chocolate cake on his tray. Brian loved chocolate cake and was eager to get some in his mouth. His fingers manipulated it poorly though, crushing the cake and getting his hands coated in frosting. He brought a handful to his mouth, smearing his cheek and dropping crumbs down his bib and onto his diapered lap. He sucked the frosting and crumbs off his fingers and palms, no more concerned with neatness than Meggie. By the time the treat was finished, Brian was a very messy college boy. Mama had to clean off his face and hands with a wet nap, the same as she did for Rachel. I do it. Rachel had tried to insist. But Sarah had ignored the squalling girl's pleas and cleaned her up. Next time, honey, you need to let a grown-up get you clean right now. No. Rachel repeated. Sarah and Amanda shared an exasperated look, continuing to clean up their charges. Once the kids were relatively clean again, Amanda placed a rattle on each of their trays while she went to prepare their bottles. Meggie took to banging hers on the tray, then discovered it was just as fun to chew on it. Brian gave his an experimental shake and was soon engrossed in playing with it. He used it as a drumstick, a conductor's baton and a maraca. Rachel refused to get suckered into playing with a baby toy again. She was determined to keep her mind intact. So she simply shoved hers off the edge of the tray, letting it drop to the floor where it was well out of reach. Careful, hun, you shouldn't throw your toys away, Sarah told the girl, picking it up and placing it on the tray for her again. Rachel said nothing but stared the woman in the eye as she shoved it back off the tray. The toy slammed into the floor with a terrific clatter. Sarah shook her head reproachfully and picked up the rattle again. This time she held it out before Rachel and enticed her. Come on, baby girl, don't you like your toy? Listen to the lovely sounds it makes. Rachel shook her head no, willing the woman to leave her alone. But then the mama was shaking the toy, and it was so bright and colorful. It moved back and forth and made these funny, indescribable sounds. Rachel wanted to look away, but it was entrancing, the shifting colors, the rattling noise. She found herself reaching out and the smiling friendly lady slipped it into her hand. Shaking it herself was doubly gratifying. Why had she ever been upset about being given this silly toy? It was so much fun. Okay, honey, time for your milky BABA, the mama announced, breaking her concentration on the rattle. Rachel looked up out of her daze to see Sarah holding out a BABA filled with milk for her. It was one of those crooked baby bottles that were supposed to be healthier or something. Rachel shook her head, putting out her hand, palm flattened, to refuse the bottle. Okay, so she'd played with a rattle, that didn't really make her a baby. She wore a diaper, okay, but she hadn't actually used it yet. No, she was not really a baby. She wouldn't accept a BABA. However, that nipple did look enticing. Memories of having her thumb in her mouth came flooding back. It had started as nail biting, a bad habit sure, but not infantile. But having something in her mouth like that had felt deeply satisfying on a level she couldn't have imagined before. The more of her thumb she'd taken into her mouth, the safer, more relaxed and peaceful she'd felt. Now that big rubber nipple on the BABA seemed to be calling to her. If her thumb had felt that nice, what would a nipple BABA be like? How could she refuse to find out? No. She couldn't just give in like that. Rachel shook her head, closing her eyes tight and trying to force herself not to think about the thumb, or the nipple before her. She was an adult, a college student for God's sake. She had to get a grip on herself. The rubber nipple brushed across her lips, lighting up the nerves there. Instinct took over and in a split second her mind betrayed her and Rachel sucked the nipple into her mouth. She bit down and suckled on it, immediately being rewarded with slightly warm, creamy milk. She suckled and swallowed, letting it squirt across her tongue and cheeks and roll luxuriously down her throat. It made her warm all over, inside and out. She drifted away from her worries, lost in pleasurable sensations. With her eyes only open a crack, she could just make out Brian and Maggie enjoying their own bass filled with yummy milk. They too looked just as happy and peaceful as could be suckling away. When the BABA was all done, Rachel found she didn't really want to stop suckling. It was like an urge she had now, to suckle, to keep something in her mouth. She only stopped when Sarah eased the bottle away from her. Rachel wasn't happy to give it up at all. She reached out for it desperately and squalled. "Mine. That mine," she screeched at the woman. "Shush now, dear," Sarah told her. "I think someone's getting a bit sleepy and cranky after her BABA. Time for this little one to have her nappy poo." The tray was removed and Sarah undid the belt, keeping Rachel in her seat. The woman didn't lift her out immediately though. Instead, she leant closer and cuddled Rachel into her arms, rubbing her bare back. It wasn't the same as having her mama do it, but being held and cuddled was still very nice. Though she was confused when the gentle rubs turned to patting on her back. The next thing she knew, something was rushing up her windpipe and she opened her mouth to burp loudly. A second loud burp followed shortly thereafter. "Ooh, that was quite a burp. You must have really enjoyed your BABA to get so much air with your milk," Sarah told her. With that, she set Rachel down on the kitchen floor, letting the girl rest on her hands and knees while she lifted Brian out of his chair and began patting his back the same way. Rachel watched her diapered, bibbed friend get burped by his mother, letting out a series of lengthy burps while he rested his head on her shoulder. "There we go, that's a good boy, get it all out," she crooned to him. Once Brian seemed to be all burped out, Sarah lifted him out of his seat and set him on the floor with Rachel. Amanda lifted Maggie out of her seat and carried the grinning big baby out of the room, cooing baby talk to her. Sarah set about cleaning up the sizable mess they'd made, leaving them to creep on the floor. After a couple minutes of that, boredom set in and the duo got restless. Brian grabbed one of the pots Maggie had left on the floor, tapping it lightly. Rachel reached out and touched his wrist. "Don't do it. Looks dumb," she told him. Brian shrugged. "Look at what I wearing," he said, gesturing to his diaper. "Already look dumb." Rachel conceded the point, letting his wrist go and watching him bang at the pot, hitting it over and over. She could see that something about making noise satisfied him. He looked entranced. In fact, she could feel a growing need to make noise herself. Maybe she could just give the little pot a bang. She started to reach out for it. "Well, how's Mama's little Ringo doing? Are you gonna be a rock star someday, honey? Mama's drummer boy?" Sarah asked Brian as she appeared leaning over them, drying off a tray with a paper towel. Rachel yanked her hand back as though the pot was burning hot. She'd almost given in, almost acted like a stupid little baby again. It was getting harder to fight it. The younger they were treated, the less bodily control they had, the stronger the urges became. It seemed like an instinct she had to fight. Her body wanted to do infantile things. Brian, for his part, enjoyed Mama's silly tone and playful questions. He even smiled up at her, banging loudly on the pot, until he saw Rachel staring worriedly at him. The smile disappeared in an instant, and he blushed with shame at acting so foolish, like he was enjoying being treated like a baby. Mama's praise made him feel all warm and fuzzy inside, but Rachel's cold appraising gaze reminded him that this wasn't natural at all. "So we, dunno what I was thinkin'," he told her once Mama was gone again. "Don't wanna end up weak, Maggie," she reminded him. Brian nodded gravely. No, he certainly didn't want that. The sounds of rolling wheels could be heard then, coming closer and closer. The rolling sound was interspersed with high-pitched giggles and squeals. Brian and Rachel looked towards the living room, wondering what was going on. As they looked, Maggie appeared back around the corner. She was in some kind of odd contraption. She was standing up, but she was also sitting down. She was in a saucer-shaped vehicle with several wheels like would be on an office chair. Her bottom was suspended in a stretchy seat that wrapped around her crotch, allowing her bowed legs to dangle so her toes brushed across the floor, allowing her to propel herself about without actually walking. The whole contraption was a giant-sized baby walker. It was yellow plastic with a red seat. There was a tray before her with Sesame Street characters built into it, lighting up when she bopped them with her hands. So as she jolted the walker left and right with her uncoordinated leg thrusts, she was also eagerly slapping at the figures on the tray, crowing her delight as they lit up. "Oh my, that is so lovely," Sarah gushed as the bare-chested college girl hopped up and down in the stretchy seat and banged at the tray. "I know, isn't it? She just loves making her walkies in the thing. You know what, I have just the thing for Brie too," Amanda exclaimed, hurrying back into the living room. She returned pushing a second adult-sized baby walker. It was a bit more basic than Meg's, colored simple gray and lacking toys on the tray. Meggie loves her new one with toys, but I think Brie would fit in her old one perfectly. Sarah nodded in agreement and soon Brian was being pulled away from his pots and lifted into the walker. He felt the stretchy material slip around his thighs as he was lowered. It caught him and suspended him in the air. It was an odd feeling, being able to just feel the floor brushing back and forth across his toes. "It's a perfect fit," Sarah declared. "Excellent, these things are really good for keeping them out of trouble, you know. They can't quite reach anything to get hurt and there's no falling down. But I'm afraid they do bang into a lot of stuff, so put away anything breakable." "I'll keep that in mind." Rachel felt a bit left out watching Brian and Meggie bump into each other in their saucers. She was still stuck down on the floor, her useless legs folded up beneath her. Silly as they looked, they at least allowed her friends the dignity of being at the same height as the grown-ups. As she sulked on the floor though, Rachel soon discovered much more pressing concerns. Her stomach was cramping, forcing her to bend over. The cramping moved downwards, into her lower abdomen. She moaned as she felt it continuing to move through her, fearing what was about to happen. Sure enough, her recent meal had triggered her digestive system to clear some room. She needed to make a poopy, and she needed to make it soon. She wanted to hold it in but her sphincter muscle seemed to have lost all its tone. She couldn't seem to clamp down at all. She really did need this diaper after all, she had lost all control. That was a painful fact to admit. A knocking at the door distracted Rachel from her dread for a second. The mamas looked up and Sarah glanced at the clock. "Do you think it's her?" she queried. "Hello, hello, hello." Joy's voice called from the front foyer, answering Sarah's question. "Hi Joy, we're in the kitchen," Amanda called out. Joy came in carrying Danny on her hip. Though he was nearly the same size as her, and looked ridiculous with his long gangly legs wrapped around hers, Joy seemed to have no difficulty carrying him. The teen baby was wearing a yellow terracloth onesie that left his legs and feet bare. A matching yellow and white Pluto pacifier bobbed back and forth in his mouth. "How was the dentist?" Sarah asked as Joy walked in. "Oh, just fine, little guy is having some real discomfort with the teething now. But hey, he'll be able to really try some solids pretty soon, so that's nice." "He's really getting big," Amanda agreed, tickling Danny's cheek. "I just hope he doesn't bite Mama too much while he's feeding. I don't want to be nursing a shark." "That's why I had to switch Rachel to formula when she was 18, Joy commented. "Speaking of which, how is my little princess?" "She's been perfect, ate all her food and had quite a good couple burps for me too," Sarah told her. Joy looked down at Rachel and smiled wickedly. "Oh, I know that face. Looks like we're about to have a little stink bomb here," she joked. Rachel shuddered and pawed at her tummy. Was she really that obvious? How could her mama be making fun of this? She was feeling absolutely humiliated and now all the adults were giggling and staring at her. "Potty please," she squealed, willing even to use a stupid potty seat to poop in now, an idea that mortified her only hours ago. "Potty? I wonder where she learned that word, Joy mused. P.E.'s, wanna potty, Rachel repeated. She must have heard it at daycare, Sarah suggested. They were ignoring her. How could they just stand there and allow her to poo-poo her diaper? It infuriated Rachel. Then she felt the final cramp. Despite all her willpower, the body betrayed her, pushing in response. She felt the mess ooze out from her bottom, squishing into the seat of her diaper. It was an unstoppable flow. She could feel it sliding across her bottom, coating her soft skin. Rachel could smell it too, almost immediately. It was a powerful stench, inescapable, unmistakable. Then came the noise, little popping farts as she pushed the last of it out. The sound, the smell, her red face and tight lips all announced to the room exactly what she'd just done. She recalled Meggie vomiting when Danny had pooped his diaper at the restaurant. She'd been sick then herself. Now it was her diaper, her bottom covered in her own dirty mess. Brian was staring down at her from his walker, a look of utter horror in his eyes. He wrinkled his nose and pushed his walker backwards, away from her stench. Rachel didn't cry this time, she was beyond tears now. She fought the urge to vomit again, forcing herself to think of other things. Pu. Wow girl, you sure are a stinky bum, aren't you? Joy chided her daughter. I poopy, Rachel managed to choke out. Yes, sweetie, that's right, Joy now agreed, seemingly proud the girl recognized the fact. If she knows when she's messy, maybe she will actually be ready for the potty soon, the woman said to the other mothers. Maybe, but 21 is a bit early, don't you think? Sarah asked. Could be she's a really early bloomer. Anyway, we'll see if she continues to show interest. Maybe in a couple months we'll give it a try. In the meantime though, we better get this girl clean before her bum gets all red and itchy. Rachel watched Mama set Danny down on the floor and come over to her. She was being lifted by her armpits, the heavily loaded diaper hanging threateningly low on her hips as Mama carried her out of the kitchen. You can use Sue and Meg's changing table, in their room, Amanda told her. Thanks. Mama swung her arm under Rachel's bum and settled her on the hip as Danny had been before. The move caused the messy diaper to squish against her bottom, spreading the cooling mess even more. With every step Mama took, the diaper squished across her bum again and she winced and gagged. Upstairs they went, then along a darkened hall and into a room. When Joy found the switch on the wall, the room lit up, revealing a big nursery. 2 massive cribs stood against opposite walls, each quite big enough to hold an adult. One had a mobile filled with shining green and silver orbs, the other had a mobile using glittering bits of pink and red plastic rocket ship, stars and planets revolving around and around. Other than the cribs, the room was Spartan. After all, the babies' toys were all inside their cribs or down in the living room in the playpen. In fact, Mama carried Rachel to the only other piece of furniture in the room, a changing table. Like everything else, it was wide and long enough to fit a 21-year-old. Mama set her down on her back, making her squirm as the cool plastic brushed across her exposed skin. Then Mama pulled a sizable strap across her tummy and buckled it in so she wouldn't fall off the table. Don't need that, Rachel insisted. But Mama shushed her and in a quick motion slipped a pink binky between her lips. Rachel tried to spit it out right away, but Mama held it there a moment. It felt good to have the rubber teat in her mouth actually. Something about suckling was so comforting, it was indescribable. She began to suckle the rubber nub, her cheeks working as the sounds of her suckling reached Mama's ear and she let go of the binky. Rachel didn't try to speak again, the binky felt too nice to remove. She didn't want to speak, she only wanted to suckle, and suckle and suckle. But she still didn't like being touched and laid bare on this table, so she squirmed more. Then Mama produced a set of plastic keys, one red, others yellow, blue, pink, orange and so on. Mama jiggled the keys, making them noisy. Rachel found their motion entrancing, the noises they made music to her ears. She wanted them so badly. She reached out for them, but Mama held them just out of reach. She heard the rip of the tabs of her diaper letting go and then felt cool air on her exposed privates. She didn't care, she wanted those keys. Mama let Rachel close her hands on the keys at last and she felt triumphant. She felt them all over, brushed them against her cheek to feel their texture. Seized by a sudden urge, she released the binky from her mouth and bit down on the solid plastic, feeling it with her gums and gnawing at it with her few teethies. She felt her legs being lifted and then a very cool wet thing rubbing in her bottom finally distracted her from the keys. Mama was between her legs again, lifting them in the air, cleaning her poopy bum with baby wipes. The filthy diaper was already gone and she was naked again. Rachel blinked and focused her thoughts. She was lying on a changing table naked with toy keys in her mouth. Yet, she could feel that she was actually smiling. She yanked the keys clear and wiped the smile from her face instantly, staring determinedly at the ceiling while the wiping continued and got harsher. "My, you got messy this time, Rachel," Joy told her happily. Seeing her girl's sour expression, she reached a free hand up and tickled Rachel's tummy, making her squeal and giggle despite herself. When the cool wipes were finally put away and Mama had cleaned off all the revolting poopy, Rachel breathed a sigh of relief. Mama got out some lotion next, cleaning her most private parts with a motherly care. She counted the dots on the ceiling above her while Mama dusted her with baby powder, then slipped a new diaper under her bum and taped it up. Mama brushed her nose right up to Rachel's and gave her an Eskimo kiss, then replaced the binky back in the girl's mouth. "All clean and snug," she chirped. "You don't need a shirt tonight, do you?" "No, of course not, we want baby to be nice and comfy." Mama lifted her off the table at last, but instead of returning downstairs she carried Rachel across to one of the cribs, dropping the side and setting her on the bed. Rachel scooted back into it as Mama raised the side back up, leaving her looking at her mother through wooden bars. She felt like she was in a jail cell or a cage at a zoo. "Okay, Rachel, time for nighty-nights," Mama explained to the perplexed young woman. Rachel shook her head no. "Sorry, hun, but it's really late. You need some shut-eye. We have a big day tomorrow. We're going to Jimbury. Doesn't that sound fun?" "Of course it does. I know Mama's princess is just going to love it. But you need to be rested, sweetie. You need to go night-nights." Rachel plucked out her pacifier. "No, not any nights. It earwy. No beddy." "Sure, honey, Brian and Meggie will be up for beddies in just a moment. You all need to rest." Rachel still pouted, cursing her inability to get adult thoughts to reach her mouth and come out sounding properly. She would have continued to rage, but she could feel her unstable emotions getting out of control again. She didn't want to have a silly baby tantrum or cry in front of Mama. So she crossed her arms and sulked in silence. Mama dropped the rail halfway again so she could peck a kiss on Rachel's forehead, then she put it back up and headed out the door, blowing kisses as she went. The crib had a number of plushy animals and along the wall side of it was a PlayStation with levers and buttons to push, sounds to make and such. Rachel ignored it, sucking on her binky again and counting the toy keys still in her hands. She didn't have to play alone long though. Soon enough the mamas were all pouring into the room with the babies in their arms. Unfortunately they decided to separate them by sex, setting empty-headed little Meggie in her crib and putting Brian across the room with drooling, finger-munching Danny boy. Rachel wasn't sure where Sue was sleeping, but apparently not with them. Maybe she was in a damned bassinet at this point, Rachel thought. Meggie hopped up and down in the crib, standing up with the support of the railing. "Okay, jumping bean, time to get to sleepy-bys," Amanda told the excited girl. "Ni." Meggie agreed, dropping to her bum and gathering the fuzzy blankie up to her cheek for a cuddle. Her mama messed up her hair and then headed out after the others, leaving the room illuminated by a nightlight that cast an eerie bluish glow. A baby monitor sat on the changing table between the cribs. Rachel watched it carefully, waiting for Maggie to drift off to sleep, sucking on the end of the blankie. She just needed to wait until the real babies were asleep, then she could talk to Brian about their predicament. They could figure out where that book was, maybe find it once the grown-ups were asleep. Suckling the binky and cuddling the soft stuffed toy bunny in her arms, Rachel was suddenly very sleepy. Maggie seemed to be out of it, surely Danny was too. Now she just needed to get up and drop the side of the crib. If only her eyes weren't so heavy. She just needed to rest them for a second, just for a moment. Bath time. Morning sunlight streamed into the nursery, playing across Rachel's face, slowly waking her from deep slumber. Even with her eyes still closed, she could see the light through her eyelids. She could feel the warmth on her face too. It wasn't the sun that brought her quickly back to awareness though, it was the smell. Something absolutely reeked. It was 5 times worse than when she was poopy last night. Her hand instinctively went to the front of her diaper. Sure enough, it squelched at the touch and she felt the cool liquid of pee-pee swishing around her loins. But there was no muck on her bum, she hadn't made poo-poo in her sleep. Rachel opened her eyes, blinking as they adjusted to the light. Something was looming above her and to the right. Rolling over to see it more clearly, Rachel gagged and pulled back to the side of the crib. A large brown-stained bare bottom was presented to her. Maggie was standing at the side of the crib holding onto the railing, her poop smeared but uncovered and presented to Rachel. The woman's messy, reeking diaper was discarded on the mattress of the crib, where she'd apparently yanked it off after waking up messy. Now Maggie was standing there buck naked, smiling and clapping her slightly poopy hands at the window, where she could see birdies flying by. Rachel's sudden movement got the big baby's attention though, and she twisted around, letting go of the railing and so plopping on her back. She sat up, unbothered by her tumble onto the soft mattress, and extended her dirty, disgusting hands towards Rachel, as though expecting a hug. Having no intention of cuddling the messy girl, Rachel dropped the side of the crib and slipped out of it. Her legs folded beneath her as soon as they reached the floor, forcing her to crawl across the room to the other crib. Rising to her knees, Rachel managed to get hold of the other crib's railing. She pulled herself up to a standing position, her legs quaky but holding, and dropped the side. Danny was awake already too. Her 18-year-old brother was still dressed in a yellow terry-onesie, playing with his feet. He'd apparently become much more limber as a result of the changes to his body caused by the cursed book. He was able to easily pull his legs back so that his feet were on either side of his head. He yanked them back and forth playfully, babbling to himself. "Oh Danny, I so wee," Rachel apologized to her sadly reduced brother. He had been so bright before, so innovative and thoughtful. Now he had discovered how to get his toes into his own mouth and was beaming with cross-eyed glee as he munched away at his toesies. Brian too was awake, and he didn't look anywhere near as happy as the toe muncher beside him. Brian looked as gravely serious as one dressed in a t-shirt and diaper could. "We squooed," he muttered after a long silence. Rachel shook her head and gave him a reproachful look. He wasn't going to abandon her now, she couldn't carry on alone. "Don't say that. We can fix it," she insisted. "I wet," Brian replied simply. "Me too," Rachel admitted. "Don't matter. We gonna find da book today." Brian shrugged. "And then what?" She didn't have an answer for that, of course. So she replied with another question. "So what then?" "We give up and be weak him," she asked, gesturing to the young man still absolutely engrossed with his footsies. "Or her," she continued, pointing to the poopy naked woman shaking the set of toy keys about. "No," Brian agreed, clearly disgusted by the very thought. "White den. We gonna fix it," Rachel told him, determined. The door to the room opened without warning and Rachel twisted around to find Mama and Sarah looking over at her, perplexed. "How did you get loose, silly goose?" Mama asked. Shrugging, Rachel just replied, "Wanted tarpway." Mama put her hands on her hips and shook her head, but the smile told Rachel she wasn't really in trouble. Amanda was already putting her dirty girl on the change table to clean her up. My goodness, she's a mess. I think I'll have to give her a bath before Jimbury, Amanda said. That sounds like a good idea, let's give them all a bath, Joy agreed. Amanda nodded, and a few minutes later Brian and Rachel were standing in the bathroom holding the wall for support while their mamas stripped off their wet diapers and wiped their privates clean. It surprised Rachel how comfortable she was becoming with being naked. She didn't like it, in fact it still embarrassed her, but nothing like the shame she felt earlier. She'd been stripped so many times now it was becoming routine. She imagined that if this went on much longer she might actually start to lose her adult modesty. Even seeing Brian's penis dangling there beside her and watching his mama wipe it clean didn't shock her anymore. There we go, all dry, Sarah announced as she finished wiping the tip of Brian's pee-pee clean. Now get those cute little tushies in the tubby, she directed, leading Brian by the hand. Rachel crept across the cool tile floor and climbed into the tub after Brian, joining Maggie and Danny already inside. Amanda was washing Sue separately. The teen girl was sat in her baby bath again and like Danny was enjoying a nice morning toe-munching session while her mama washed her tummy and boobies. The big tub was larger than a normal one, but it was still quite a squeeze with 4 teens and young adults in it. Danny and Maggie were engrossed in a splashing competition, suds piled on their heads as they slapped their flattened palms on the surface of the bathwater and crowed their delight. Brian, even more than Rachel, was still feeling shame at being naked in a tub with the others. So he sat quietly, covering up his pee-pee as best he could. He had been cringing as his mama cleaned it right in front of Rachel and now he just wanted a diaper on so he could hide his shame. After allowing the babies some time for play, and once the floor of the bathroom was sufficiently soaked, the mothers stepped in to bathe the kids. Brian and Rachel tried to be cooperative so that it would be over faster. When Sarah told them to lie on their fronts so she could clean their bums, they did as they were told. Only when they saw the flash did they realize she was actually snapping photos of the 4 young people lined up in the tub with their bare bums pressed hip to hip against each other and presented to the camera. "Hey!" Brian yelled, wounded. Sarah didn't seem to notice his disapproval. "What cute little bums," she said to Joy. "I know, couldn't you just eat them up?" Sarah nodded back, giggling. The bath seemed to go on for an eternity. Finally the water was drained and the wrinkly kids climbed out and let their mothers towel them dry. When their new outfits came out they were just relieved to see some clothing, regardless of how infantile it was. First came their new diapers, thick but flexible for the budding toddlers. These were simply taped onto them while they lay on the bathroom floor. Then their new clothing was brought out. Rachel found herself being slipped into a pale pink and white romper with stitched-on bunnies. The fleecy garment was quite soft and cuddly and it covered her breasts and even her thighs, coming to just above the knee length. It had snaps around the crotch to allow for easy diaper changes. Brian found himself being placed in a romper of his own, though his was more of a boy's design. It was yellow and blue striped with a rugby shirt-styled collar. His failed to cover any of his legs though and the lining of his diaper poked out around the leg holes, leaving no doubt he wasn't potty-trained anymore. Just as with Rachel's, his romper had snaps around the crotch for quicker changes. Beside them Maggie was being slipped into a simple baby dress. It was purple and sleeveless at the top with lots of ruffles in the skirt. Danny wore black jean shorts over a white t-shirt, though they were clearly meant for a baby as the jeans had snaps around the crotch the same as the rompers. Finally Sue was carried back into the room dressed in a pale blue onesie with the word "I pooed" across the front. The mamas all shared a chuckle at the silly outfit while Brian and Rachel tried to figure out what was so funny. It wasn't a long car ride to the mall but getting all the babies strapped in took longer than the actual drive. There were no more simple booster seats, they were now all in full baby seats, Sue's facing backwards. Maggie, Rachel and Brian were all placed in the minivan while the younger babies went in the other car. sitting strapped in their confining baby seats while Sarah turned on inane nursery rhymes to play the whole drive. The former college students felt a renewed sense of hopelessness. Of course, Meggie was perfectly content to chew on her toy bunny and bang her hands on the window, but the other two simply sulked and tried to tune out the insipid music. Halfway to the mall, Meggie threw her bunny at the seat in front of her, watching it fall to the floor. She leant over as best she could in her restraints and tried to pick it up. Of course, anyone with half a brain could see that would be impossible. Meggie soon realized this as well, but she couldn't undo her restraints to get at it either. Pushing the big red buttons and releasing the belts was simply much too complicated for Meggie's mushy brain. So, out of frustration, Meggie began to wail. And unlike a little baby, her wails were at adult volume, ear-piercingly loud. While Sarah tried in vain to appease the screeching, bawling young woman, Rachel and Brian covered their ears. Meggie was in full tantrum mode, kicking her bare feet against the back of the passenger seat, pounding her fists on her baby seat. Sarah drove with one hand and rifled through the bag she'd packed with the other, glancing away from the road every couple seconds to look for something to calm the girl down. As she did so, the bag tipped on its side and spilled out on the floor. Brian's eyes widened as he looked down at the contents sliding about the floor. Among them was a pink book with bunnies on the cover. Even though he couldn't actually read the title anymore, he knew that was Catcher in the Rye in its new form. If only he could reach it. D.A. book. D.A. book, he yelled to Rachel, pointing. Barely able to hear him over the commotion the girl next to her was making, Rachel tried to see what he was pointing at. When she understood what she was looking at, Rachel let out a gasp. The book was right there in the back seat with them, only inches away. It was well out of Brian's reach, but she could get to it, not with her hands of course, but with her feet. For once she was happy Mama was taking her out to a public place in bare feet, because now she was able to use her toes to grasp at the book. Unfortunately, it was harder than she thought. Her fingers had become less coordinated and her toes were even worse. She finally succeeded in pulling it away from the rest of the bag's contents, placing it right beneath her feet. "Leave it, dear," Brian told her. "I almost got it," she insisted. "Don't push it, we get it after," he told her. So she stopped trying and left it on the floor. She could have gotten her belt off and picked it up, but not without Sarah noticing. Meanwhile, Meggie had finally calmed down, her wailing trailing off to quiet sobbing and hiccups. Rachel decided that as soon as Brian's mama freed her from the seat, she'd grab the book. Out in public. The minivan eased into a parking space in the covered parking lot outside the Westfield Tri-City Mall. Sarah turned the car off, finally ending the incessant repetition of the nursery rhymes. Rachel readied herself to grab the book, but wasn't sure if she should unstrap herself from the seat. She didn't want to get in trouble. She decided to wait for Sarah to let her out. Brian's mama slid the door open and immediately gave her boy a tickle on his tummy. "Well, weren't you a good little passenger today?" she praised. "You and Rachel were so good, Mama will get you a special treat for lunch." Sarah drew out a collapsed stroller from the floor behind their seats, popping it open to reveal it was a double-seat one. It had 2 navy seats with little waist belts to strap them in and foot rests just above the small grey wheels. The back had pouches for Mama to fit their diaper bags, baby wipes, and toys into. The stroller was as big as a small couch once it was assembled, easily big enough to fit 2 adults. Sarah undid Brian's seatbelts and swept him into her arms without giving him a second to attempt to grab the book from the floor. In one motion she had him sat in the stroller and was doing up the belt around his waist. As she did this, Rachel decided she couldn't wait any longer. She pressed down on the red button at the center of her tummy, releasing the belts. Shoving them over her head, she scooted forward out of the backwards angled seat and dropped onto her knees on the car floor. With a squeal of success, she pulled the round-edged toddler book into her arms and held it tight against her body. "How did you get out of your seat?" Sarah asked as she ducked back into the car. "Took off DA belt. Me hoop. I big girl," Rachel told her, trying to sound cute and innocent. Well, thank you, honey, but I think it's safer if you let a grown-up undo your belt from now on. K. Rachel agreed, happy she wasn't in any trouble. Sarah nodded and lifted Rachel by her armpits, swinging her through the air. She felt her bottom slipping into the new stroller seat after the dizzying spin. Then as Sarah did up her waist belt, the grown-up noticed the book in her hands. "What you got there, sweetie?" she inquired. "My book," Rachel insisted, hugging it tighter. "Oh, are you going to read that to your little brother?" Rachel nodded sheepishly, unwilling to admit she couldn't read a word. "Well, I think I'd better hang on to it now so it isn't lost in the mall," Sarah declared, reaching out for the book. Rachel shook her head vigorously and held onto it tightly. "No. Mine," she yelled. "Rachel, don't be naughty. Let me have the book. You don't want it to get hurt, do you?" Sarah asked, grasping the exposed edge of the book. Rachel's heart was pounding. After all she'd gone through, she couldn't just let it go. The book was her only link to the life she'd once had, perhaps her only means of returning to it. She wanted to explain all that to the woman, but her mind was racing in panic and she couldn't put her words together. "Mine. Need it," was all she could manage to yell. But Rachel was no match for the woman. Despite being no bigger than the girl, she seemed infinitely stronger. She pried open the girl's arms and slipped the book from her grasp. Rachel was reduced to squalling with anger, tears dripping down her cheeks as she kicked her feet on the footrest and wailed. Brian seemed frightened by her loss of control and he tried to comfort her, rubbing her arm and whispering that she had to calm down. Sarah placed the book back in her bag and swung that over her shoulder. She simply ignored Rachel's tantrum, hoping it would stop when it didn't gain her any attention. Instead, she lifted Meggie out of her seat and onto her hip, carrying the now calm binky-sucking girl through the parking lot. As the stroller neared the entry to the mall, Rachel forced herself to get control. She couldn't be seen having a tantrum, she just couldn't. It was hard to stop though. Her emotions felt overwhelming. How did the woman not understand how important that book was to her? Sure, to a grown-up it was just some silly baby book, but it meant the world to Rachel. She'd had it right there in her arms and now it was gone. How could she not cry after losing it? The stroller rolled through the automatic doors, a cool air-conditioned breeze blowing across their faces. As the wheels jostled over the entry mat and then onto the smooth faux granite floor, Rachel finally managed to dry her tears and confine her cries to a few sniffles. Brian touched her arm again, giving her a sympathetic look. "You okay?" he asked. Rachel gave him a little nod, afraid to open her mouth to speak lest a wail come out instead. "We get it, Gain," he assured her. Rachel wanted to believe that, but she still felt lost. The mall was filled with people. The first thing she saw was a group of half a dozen 30-ish people wearing hoodies and baggy calf-length jean shorts, iPods in their ears, texting on cell phones as they went from store to store. They looked like the junior high-aged mall rats she usually saw in this place, except now the boys were 6 feet tall and balding and the girls actually needed makeup to cover the first signs of wrinkles on their foreheads. A man and woman of about 50 passed the bubblegum chewing gaggle of 30-year-olds, towing 2 20-something men by their hands. These towering young fellows were each about 6'3" or 4. One was dressed in a Spider-Man t-shirt, baggy jean shorts and light-up black sandals. The other wore a tank top, gaudy bright swim trunks and yellow SpongeBob flip-flops. Spider-Man boy was pointing at a candy shop, begging to get some sugary treats while the clearly younger boy was busy picking his nose with his free hand. Mom and Dad just led them out of the mall, ignoring the little one's pleas. The further their stroller pushed into the mall, the busier it became and the more self-conscious Rachel and Brian felt about their get-up and mode of transport. Their only comfort was that there were others who appeared worse off. Like the woman who appeared a year or 2 older than them and was being led through the food court by an older man by a harness strapped around her shoulders. The man pulled the leash to keep her toddling along whenever she spotted something shiny or pretty and tried to wander off to touch it. Or the young man about the same age as her who was being led skipping barefoot through the mall in just his t-shirt and Bob the Builder underoos, probably having wet his pants earlier. Rather than head directly for Jimbury, Sarah pushed their stroller into the food court, heading for McDonald's. As they waited in line, Brian began to squirm. At first he wasn't sure why he felt so antsy. He thought maybe it was because he was being confined to a stroller instead of being able to walk. But it was more than that. He felt pressure building up, he needed to pee. Brian adjusted his position, trying to hold it in. He'd wet himself in his sleep but not yet while awake. He recalled the disgust on Rachel's face when she used her diaper the night before. It was clearly an awful experience. Sarah reached the front of the line and ordered a burger for herself and juice for the babies. Looking down at her little boy, she saw him squirming in his seat. "What's the matter, baby?" she asked, giving him a light tickle on his tummy again. That was the last thing Brian needed. The tickle was the final straw. He giggled involuntarily and his immature bladder let go. He felt the rush of warmth down his penis and then the eruption of liquid in his diaper. Nerve endings danced with pleasure as he let go. Even though the urge had only hit him moments ago, it felt as though he'd been holding it in for an eternity. It was a massive relief to get it out and Brian couldn't help but sigh. The warmth of the pee swirling around his diaper and cupping his crotch was nothing short of pleasurable. He even smiled, it felt so nice. Mama knew exactly what the squirming, the sigh and the smile meant too. "Oh," she declared jokingly. "I think someone just made wee-wee." "Is that true, Brie?" Brian's smile was gone, his cheeks pink. He nodded furtively, not really wanting to admit what he'd done but unable to deny it. At least it wasn't poopy, he thought. That was a small comfort, but it was something. He felt Mama's hand caressing his cheek, mussing up his hair. "That's okay, honey, Mama will get you changed in just a second," she crooned. With her meal in hand, Mama turned the stroller around and headed out of the food court and into the main mall. She checked her watch and declared, "We don't have much time, honey, so Mama will have to get you changed fast." She rolled not towards the restrooms but to the center of the mall, stopping next to a maroon padded bench backing onto a row of fake-looking plants. She undid Brian's belt and lifted him out, juggling him and Meggie for a second before slipping the girl into the empty stroller seat and setting him on the bench and pushing him onto his back. Up to that point he'd been confused by what she was doing, but then it hit him exactly what was happening. Brian shook his head and tried to sit back up. "Brian, be still for Mama," she ordered. He continued to struggle, squirming and trying to sit up again, banging his heels on the padded bench. "No, not change here. Go back, womb," he demanded. "Honey, there isn't time. Now don't be silly, you can't stay in a wet diaper. Mama needs to get you all clean and dry." Brian twisted away from her, but she was so much stronger than him now. He couldn't tell if it was he who'd become weak or she who had become super strong, but the result was the same. She pinned him down and began to undo the snaps on his romper's crotch. Pop, 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 they went, slowly revealing his diaper. Rachel and Meggie had front row seats to his diaper change. Rachel was at least nice enough to deliberately look away, but Meggie seemed quite entertained and kept up a running commentary. "Him pee pee baby. Pee pee dear pee. Mama pee pee bye bye," she babbled loudly. The snaps undone, Mama pushed the romper up to reveal the whole diaper, then undid the tabs and opened it up. Sure enough, it was quite soaked, urine still glistening on his penis. Mama slipped the diaper out from under him, balling it up and disposing of it. Looking around, she rolled her eyes and declared, "Whoops, forgot to get a fresh one. Now stay still, baby, Mama doesn't want to have to chase any more mall jaybirds." Brian had no intention of going anywhere stripped like this. He was left lying on the bench with his whole crotch exposed, his pee-pee dangling there for every passerby to see. The cool breeze across it seemed to sting him. He didn't cry because he couldn't afford to draw any more attention to his situation. As it turned out, it didn't matter. A young woman appeared at the end of the bench, smiling down at Brian and his exposed privates. She had big innocent blue eyes, short blonde hair in messy pigtails and a goofy gap-toothed grin that told him she didn't have much going on between her ears anymore. "Mommy look at da baby getting changed," she announced loudly enough to turn the heads of every passing shopper. Brian cringed and a shiver of shame ran from his head to his bare toes. The girl's mother appeared at her side and Brian hoped she would lead the girl away and tell her off for embarrassing him so. But the woman just beamed at her daughter and nodded. She had no intention of reprimanding the girl. After all, why would anything she'd said actually embarrass Brian? He was just a dumb little baby who didn't know any better, right? "Yes, sweetie, the baby is getting a new dear pie," she agreed. "Him got a PP dear pie. I don't need a dear pie no more cause I'm a big GIL," the woman told everyone in earshot. There was nowhere to hide. He could see the shoppers turning their heads, looking down at his wet penis, seeing that he was nothing more than a diaper-wetting infant. He just prayed Mama would hurry up with her rifling through the diaper bag, pull one out and cover him up again. He needs a dear pie cause Her mother just patted her head and agreed that she was a big girl and that she was very proud of her toileting abilities. Then Sarah joined them, new diaper in her hand at last. Only she wasn't immediately pinning it on him. Instead she'd stopped to chat with the damned rubberneckers. "I see Brian has a little audience," she chuckled. "Yes, my Cindy is just fascinated with babies who still need diapers, I'm afraid." "I hope you don't mind," the other mother said. Brian rolled his eyes at the woman asking Mama if she minded when it was he who was being put on display. "No problem at all. It must be nice to have your baby out of diapers," Sarah told the woman. "No to baby," Cindy piped up. "Baby gotta wear diapers. Me go pee-pee in da potty and got big gul panties see," she declared, yanking down her shorts to reveal her Tinkerbell print pull-ups. "Cindy, big girls don't show people their undies," her mother reminded her, pulling the girl's shorts back up. "So we mommy," she pouted. "Oh, it's okay, I can see she's just very proud to be a big girl," Sarah assured. "Thanks, but she needs to learn not to go around flashing people." "Oh well, kids will be kids. She's much too little to have a sense of modesty yet." The mothers shared a knowing nod and Cindy was finally led away, waving bye-bye to the baby. Mama then turned her attention back to her boy, slipping the new diaper under him and praising his good behavior. "Thank you for staying put, dear, you've been a very good baby." Once his penis was wiped clean and he was well powdered, the diaper was finally closed up and the romper snapped shut again. Then it was he who was lifted onto Mama's hip while Meggie rode in the stroller. Jimbury. Jimbury was bustling with children and their carers when they walked in. They spotted Joy and Amanda immediately, waving at them from middle of the play area. Sue was creeping on her tummy at their feet, mouthing a big soft bean bag. Danny was apparently practicing standing, Joy holding both his hands while he stood with bowed knees and inturned toes, babbling with delight at his newfound ability to be upright. "Look, Rachel, it's your brother and his standing up," Sarah told the girl in the stroller. Sarah brought them inside the play center and Brian couldn't help but look about with some wonder. There were just so many bright colors, oversized bouncy balls, slides, ramps and toys. It was a lot to take in. Meggie was beside herself, slack-jawed with awe as she took in the room through an infant's eyes. The reception area was separated from the rest of the room by a low barrier. The welcome desk and a row of chairs for visitors and parents sat along the wall. There was a tall cabinet by the entry for people to slide their shoes into before going into the main play area. A plump older woman with dyed blonde hair and thick glasses welcomed them to Jimbury. "I'm Edna. Can I ask how old your little ones are and what program you're here for?" Sarah jostled Brian on her hip and replied, "Well, these little ones are all 21 and they're here for the pre-walking play group." "Lovely, you're right on time," Edna declared, then looked at Brian, giving him an exaggerated smile and cooing, "Well, hello there, buddy. Did you hear that, Brian? Sarah said to him. The nice lady said hello. Can you say hi back to her? Hi, Brian mumbled, not amused by their condescension. Though it only got worse when Mama grabbed his wrist and made him wave his hand like he was too thick to do so himself. What a bright little guy, Edna told Sarah. Yes, he's quite advanced for his age, almost speaks in full sentences already, she bragged. Oh, that's brilliant, you're a lucky mommy. Sarah nodded and pecked a kiss on her boy's cheek. Okay, just leave your shoes in the bin and I'll help you get the little ones into the play area. As Mama carried Brian in, he watched the kids playing around him. Several young men were tiptoeing down a balance beam raised a foot off the ground. A group about their age was crawling through a tube on the floor, a multicolored tunnel. Others were swimming about in a sort of ball pit filled with soft shapes. Everyone seemed to be having a good time. Brian was set down on the floor with his Mama sitting behind him. She pulled him back into her lap and he saw that other mothers were sitting with college-aged men and women in their laps all in a circle. Edna set Maggie and Rachel down on either side of them, showing off incredible strength as she easily carried the two adult women across the room and lowered them to the floor as though it were nothing. In front of them was what Brian recognized as a parachute. It covered a large section of the floor and their circle of moms and babies was formed around it. Edna had left, but another carer who introduced herself as Claire cheerily directed the mothers to each grab a corner of the parachute and to lift it high in the air on her mark. Mama places her mouth right by Brian's ear and whispered, "Okay baby, when Mama lifts the pretty blanket up, you get over to the other side just as fast as you can. Mama will give you a special juice BABA afterwards. Okay mommies, lift." Claire yelled, and the parachute went up. With all the cheers of encouragement, Brian couldn't help but get caught up in the spirit of the thing. He forced himself forward, immediately dropping to his hands and knees and crawling forward. The parachute's primary colors filtered the lights on the ceiling, casting a bright rainbow of light across the floor and the other babies. A young man in a Big Bird romper was creeping faster than Brian, and his competitive streak made him force his hands and legs to move faster. Halfway across and the parachute was coming down, threatening to collapse on them and trap them. With a pounding heartbeat, Brian didn't think how silly that idea was, he just pushed faster. The parachute sprang upwards again just as it seemed ready to touch their heads. Happy with the reprieve, Brian decided to try and walk the rest of the way. Surely with all this adrenaline flowing he could force his muscles to work correctly. He rose to his knees, but it was impossible to get a foot on the floor without something to pull himself up on. A confused-looking Rachel reached his side, also on her hands and knees. Without a word he grabbed her shoulders and used the girl to push himself up. She glared at him and called out in surprise. But he didn't care, his knees had straightened and he could feel the carpet under his bare soles. He was standing. With wide, halting steps he moved forward. He could hear Mama shouting her praises as he took step after step. Mamas on the other side of the circle were nodding and smiling at him, and that made him feel all good and warm inside. He made it a full 6 steps upright before his ankle rolled and he dropped heavily to his hands and knees again. But at least he'd made it all the way to the other side. Just as he reached the Mama on that side, the silky material of the parachute brushed over his head and neck as it dropped to the floor. Brian smiled up at her, proud he'd made it in time. She knelt before him and tickled him under the chin. "What a cutie pie you are," she said. Brian was starting to feel like a puppy, on his hands and knees being petted. He pulled back and looked around for his Mama. She wasn't where he'd left her anymore. Immediately he started to panic. He needed Mama so much. She did everything for him because he couldn't do anything for himself anymore. If she disappeared, what would become of him? He wanted Mama now. "Mama," he called out, tears forming in his eyes. "Where Mama?" A hand on his shoulder and the scent of Mama immediately soothed him. "Sweetie, Mama's right here baby," she assured, pulling him into a much-needed cuddle. Brian slowed down his rapid breathing as he cuddled in her arms. He had to remind himself that he was being silly, that Mama would never abandon him. He was her baby and she loved him so much. No, she'd never leave him. Once he'd calmed down a bit, Mama produced a nice big baba filled with apple juice. It looked so appealing, he grabbed for it right away, though he had trouble holding it at first. After dropping it to the floor once, Mama helped him to grip it with both hands. He took the rubber nipple in his mouth and began to suckle. The juice was nice and sweet, quenching his thirst and tasting good. He sucked greedily, downing half the bottle in a matter of moments. "What a thirsty little man," Mama commented. Brian took the nipple out of his mouth long enough to declare, "Yummy. I'm glad you like your baba, honey." It seemed all too soon the baba was empty. Mama took it away and Brian saw that the others had disappeared. He spotted Rachel across the parachute, now sat in a big baby walker like at Meg's house. This one was a bit more basic, just a white walker with mesh seat and a tray. Rachel wasn't happy about being in the contraption. She hadn't even tried to walk since the day before. She was happy to stay on the ground, where she was at least free to roam. This thing kept her all cooped up, unable to reach anything beyond the tray. Her bowed legs felt funny dangling like that, and it was strange pushing the thing about with toes just brushing the carpet. Rachel had been a bit jealous of Brian when he'd been placed in one the night before, but now she knew that was stupid. She was getting right into a good sulk when an idea popped into her head. She looked over at Sarah, standing near Brian, fitting his empty bottle back into her overfilled bag. The bag that was sitting precariously on the edge of a chair. With all her strength, Rachel dug her toes into the carpet and pushed off in Sarah's direction. Her floppy legs did the best they could and she picked up speed, aiming right for the mother's butt. Brian wasn't sure what his friend was doing. She had a look of insane determination as she flailed her legs within the saucer and scooted faster and faster towards him and Mama. As she got closer, he realized she wasn't going to stop. What the hell, he thought. But there was no time to warn Mama, for Rachel had given one last thrust and then careened into her. "Yow!" Sarah cried out as the walker slammed into her heel and hip. "Oopsie!" Rachel called out innocently, a wicked smile on her face as Sarah collapsed in a heap and the bag toppled onto the floor, spilling its contents everywhere. The bottles, clean diapers, makeup, wipes, all of it was spilled across the carpet. And right in the middle of the pile, the book. The only problem was Rachel couldn't reach it. Once again she was trapped in a baby's toy, her salvation just out of grasp. Sarah was already recovering, so Rachel knew there was only one solution. She gave Brian a desperate look, then pushed aside her pride and cried out. "War!" She wailed, forcing snot out of her nose, shaking her head and making like she was crying her eyes out. Sarah's attention went from the spilled bag to the distraught baby and she immediately was at the girl's side, trying to comfort her. While Rachel was being cuddled and assured it was okay by Mama, Brian crept over to the pile and found the book, snatching it up and crawling away as quickly as he could. The sound of Rachel wailing got more distant as he made a beeline for one of the tunnels. He didn't dare look back as he crawled in behind a slightly older man in bright red overalls. Keeping his hands just behind the man's wiggling bare feet, Brian silently willed him to hurry it up. Finally they reached the other side of the tunnel and with no one behind him, Brian was alone and hidden. Brian held the book in his hand and thought carefully about what to do. He decided there was no point trying to make it turn him grown up again. He would just try to get a bit older, then he could fix things more easily. So he spoke softly to the book, saying being a grown-up was bad. I weak being a more widdle. But not a baby. Wanna be a widdle boy, go to school and play. Please, make me widdle boy. Nothing happened, so Brian tried a new tack. Okay, I stay baby, but not my friends. Make big again. You got me. Just let go, he offered, hoping that once they were older his friends could find a way to save him too. If the book demanded a victim, maybe it would be satisfied with just him. There were no wavy lines of energy, no eerie glow emanating from the book. It didn't do a damn thing. Brian felt lost. He'd given it his all and had nothing to show for it. He felt his rage at the stupid book grow by the second. "Come on, stupid book, do something," he roared. Still nothing. "I hate you. You make everything bad," he yelled, slamming the book onto the floor and hitting it. What happened next wasn't at all what he'd been expecting. The book didn't start to glow, there was no slow change. Instead, there was a blinding flash of light and a wave of searing heat from the cursed book. Photo shoot. When his eyes adjusted from the flash, nothing seemed to have changed. He was still in the tunnel, still at Jimbury, and still dressed in the striped romper. Only the book itself seemed to be different. It had become plastic. It was now a rounded, puffy plastic infant's book with pictures of little yellow duckies on the cover. "Barpooth," he mocked the book. Brian blinked. What had he said? That didn't sound right at all. He concentrated and declared, "Marth, Barbaboo." No. This was all wrong. The book had robbed him of his ability to speak. How could he fix anything now? He couldn't, that was the simple answer. He just couldn't. There was something wet dripping on his hands. Brian saw bubbly liquid on his fingers, then he felt the wetness on his chin as well. He was drooling, spittle coating his chin and hanging from it. Brian had to concentrate on keeping his mouth closed to keep the saliva from running over his lips. Feeling inside his mouth with his tongue revealed that his teeth were all completely gone now. Fighting the panic rising up inside him, Brian began to crawl out of the enclosing space of the tunnel. His arms promptly gave out and he found himself flat on his tummy. Brian scooted on his tummy, legs flailing behind him like a frog until he was free of the tunnel. Just holding his head upright seemed to take an effort now. His muscles had turned to jelly. Even when he wasn't crawling, his legs twitched and his feet wiggled. The motor control areas of his brain were back to complete infancy now. As he left the tube and looked about the room, he discovered that his visual acuity had also decreased. He'd never needed glasses, but now everything in the distance was blurry. However, things nearby remained perfectly clear and he was able to see the woman lying on the floor facing him. For a second he didn't recognize the adult-sized infant, even though he could see her just fine. Then the face staring at him clicked into place and he gasped at Maggie. He hadn't recognized her until now because she looked very different than a minute ago. Maggie was bald, her lovely hair completely missing from her head. She was gaping at him slack-jawed with drool pouring freely from her toothless mouth. Despite the bald head and toothless mouth, it was actually her eyes which showed Brian the most prominent and disturbing change. Before, she'd been wide-eyed and innocent-looking, sure. But something had happened in this last transformation, some threshold had been crossed. Now her eyes were completely vacant, empty of all personality or even a flicker of intelligent thought. Whatever had been left of adult Megan, the little flicker of her old self he'd still seen even as she babbled and messed her diaper, it was completely gone now. Her mind had undeveloped to the point that she was nothing but an empty-headed little infant, albeit in a grown-up body. Maggie blinked those big unthinking eyes, pursed her wet lips and blew a raspberry, saliva bubbles escaping the corners of her mouth. Brian just shook his head in disgust. Then he had a terrible thought, bringing his hand to the top of his head and sighing with relief as he felt hair. Granted, it felt thinner than before and was probably so light it appeared blonde by now, but still it was hair. "Well, there you are," a voice called from just behind him. Brian managed to twist his head enough to see Mama there, hands on her hips, grinning down at him. "How did you get all the way over here, Bree?" she asked. "Badu," he babbled, forgetting he could no longer form proper words. Mama giggled at his cute babbling and picked him up. The feelings of helplessness he'd been having since this began now became complete. He was limp as a ragdoll in Mama's arms. From Meg's behavior and his lack of speech or motor control, he now estimated his abilities at the 5 or maybe 6-month-old level. As Mama rested him against her bosom and cradled his bottom with her arm, he felt that his diaper seemed much thicker as well, the leg holes no longer contoured to fit a learning walker or even a crawler. For several disorienting seconds he could only see Mama's shirt as she carried him across the room. Then she set him down in a strange seat that wrapped around him with a section sticking up between his legs. He recalled that this was called a bumbo. It was designed to keep a small infant sitting upright, preventing him flopping over on his back or tummy. It forced his legs straight out in front of him where he watched them twitch and wiggle seemingly on their own. Rachel was sat in a pink bumbo right next to his. Though her outfit hadn't changed, her hair had become thinner as well, and she too had a romper collar that was now wet with drool. Brian gave her a pitiful look, wishing he could tell her how sorry was that he'd only made things worse for them again. She glared back at him, opening her mouth as though ready to yell at him, but shut it again when the only result was more spittle down her chin. For 5 minutes they were forced to sit there trapped in their bumbo chairs watching other older kids play. With each demotion they appreciated what they'd had before. At least at the last level they were mobile and could communicate to some degree. Rachel thought she'd even enjoy being back in one of those baby walkers now. At least that was a vehicle of sorts. When Sarah and Joy returned from changing Danny into a new diaper, they set about entertaining the bored-looking babies. Danny was plopped on the floor to creep while the two mommies shook rattles before Brian and Rachel. Neither baby wanted to show any interest, even though the noises were undeniably attention-grabbing for both. Was this what their future held? How could they ever be happy contained to baby seats and forced to watch the world go by while their mothers gave them silly toys that could never entertain their adult minds? Sarah frowned at Bree's lack of interest in the rattle. "Come on, sweetie, look at the pretty rattle," she urged. "Looky, looky, Bree," she cooed to the boy, shaking it right before his eyes. Brian glanced at the rattle at last and then his eyes seemed locked on it. "Yes, there we go. There's my happy baby. Who weekays his whittle wattle? Does Bree? I think he does. I think he wants to chew it, doesn't he?" Brian began to reach out for the toy, despite himself. Mama let him take it into his hands and he found the urge to put it in his mouth was indeed irresistible. He gummed the hard plastic, slobbering over the toy and feeling ashamed by his infantile explorations. At least until he looked over and saw that Rachel was smiling and squealing with glee as her mama tickled the soles of her feet. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Brian felt light tickles brush up and down his own feet as mama copied Joy. The nerves down there seemed to have become super sensitive and he shivered with ecstasy, smiling around the rattle and giggling uncontrollably. Mama was so funny. How could getting a little tickle be so much fun? Bree likes getting icals on him's footses. Look at that silly smile. Sarah baby talked to him. Do you love your mama? Can Bree tell me who he loves? Say mama for me, sweetie. I know you can do it, just say mama for me. Feeling alive with silliness as the tickles continued, Brian opened his mouth and tried his best to make his mama happy. "Mba," he crowed. "Ooh, that was close, sweetie," mama declared. "Try again, sweetie. Come on, ickle bwibwi, tell mama who you love. Say mama." Brian concentrated on getting his tongue in the right place, then opened his mouth, ignoring the flood of drool that caused, and said, "Mama." Sarah leapt with joy, clapping her hands and then leaning it to plant several big smooches on her baby man's face. "He said it. Did you hear that, Joy?" "I sure did." Joy nodded, happy for her friend. Turning to her girl she said, "Can you do that, sweetie? Can you say mama like you little friend?" Rachel was still giggling from her tickles and decided to give it a try. "Dadu," she blathered unsuccessfully. Joy chuckled at her daughter's attempt. "Oh well, it was close, sweetie, but I'm afraid it's mama, not dada." "She'll get it soon enough," Sarah assured the other mother. "Yes, soon enough she'll be crawling and speaking real words and everything. I'll just enjoy her cute little babbles while I still can." Amanda reappeared with bald little Meggie on her hip. "Hey guys, we better get going if we're gonna get those photos done," she reminded them. "Oh goodness, you're right, we need to get going," Sarah agreed as Joy nodded. Brian and Rachel were picked up out of their bumbo seats, Brian still mouthing his rattle, and were carried out of the play area to their waiting stroller. It had changed since they were last in it though. Now instead of being two abreast there was one seat behind another. Amanda slipped Meggie into the rear seat while Rachel found herself placed in the middle one. A set of plastic toys dangled above her head just in reach of her hands. Also facing her was a little mirror secured to the back of the seat in front of her. In it she could finally get a glimpse of herself, and it wasn't a pretty picture. She could see the drool glistening on her chin, how thin and wild her hair was, the darkened soaking wet front of her romper. Even with her obvious breasts showing, she looked like an overgrown infant in every way. Brian was sat in the front seat, his legs now divided by part of the handrest. It had holes built into it holding a BABA and several toys. Once Sue and Danny were secured in their own separate stroller, they all made their way out of Jimbury and through the mall again. This time Brian wasn't paying attention to the sights, his attention was locked on the toys attached to his stroller. He didn't seem able to look away. Hitting at them over and over was just so enjoyable. Rachel felt just the same in the seat behind him. She lay back in her chair batting at the dangling toys, making them spin about and light up. It seemed like no time at all had passed before they were at their destination and their mommies were lifting them out of the stroller. Rachel actually cried out when she was lifted free. She wanted to play with the toy more. She screeched at her mama to make her stop, but that accomplished nothing. Mama just sat down on a seat with Rachel on her lap. It only occurred to Rachel a bit later that this was surely uncomfortable for Mama, as she weighed at least as much as she did. Nevertheless, Mama began to bounce Rachel on her knee, calming her down. The up and down motion was quite relaxing, in fact. She liked the sensation as well as the knowledge she was safe on Mama's lap. Once she was calmer, she was able to reflect on her recent behavior. It troubled her that she so easily accepted playing with baby toys as fun and that she'd just screamed and babbled nonsense when she was upset, like that was a normal response to things going wrong. Just the idea that she'd thrown a tantrum over losing a flashing yellow baby toy was enough to make her feel like an idiot. They were at a photography studio somewhere in the mall now. The waiting area they were in was not separated from the actual studio, so they could see the whole setup. The walls were all painted black and there was a very complicated, expensive-looking camera on a tripod in the middle of the room. There were several backgrounds available, but the one he had down at the moment was simple blue sky and clouds. There was a desk with a cash register and beside it a clothing rack with all sorts of outfits. The waiting area walls were covered in photos, some color, some black and white. It appeared from these shots that the man here specialized in baby photos. That was probably a pretty good industry if people stayed babies for over 20 years. The shots displayed showed naked or diaper-clad young men and women smiling eagerly for the camera. One had a teen girl clothed only in a diaper chewing on a big string of what were meant to be mommy's pearls, giggling her pigtailed head off. Another featured a 20-something man in a plastic kiddie fireman hat and shirtless with blue jean shortles pulling a giant red radio flyer wagon in which a lanky teen boy was seated, he with a dumb infantile grin and naked but for a diaper as well. Once Joy was satisfied that Rachel was calm enough, she was carried over to a large playpen in the corner and deposited there. The other babies were already all in it. Rachel noticed that Sue and Danny hadn't really changed this time. It appeared they were now all about the same level of development. Those two and Meggie were happily lying on their backs or tummies gnawing on the simple baby toys in the playpen. Rachel and Brian still had enough self-control not to touch toys that countless young men and women must have slobbered over. This pen was surely rife with baby germs. That didn't stop their baby-minded compatriots from offering them toys. Baba, Danny babbled to his sister, offering her a drool-soaked green teething ring. Rachel shook her head, unable even to say the word no to her brother. He stared blankly at her a moment, then returned the teething ring to his own mouth, blowing spit bubbles around it. Rachel gagged and looked away. She didn't like to see how far Danny had fallen. As with Meggie, his eyes were now devoid of recognition or any real thought process. "We'll start with your older girl then," a male voice announced from outside the pen. Rachel tried to see through the mesh, but it was too tough. Only when the man appeared over the railing, gazing disinterestedly down at them, did she see the photographer. Amanda appeared at his side a second later, and together they lifted Meggie out of the pen. "Here we go, baby," Amanda crooned to her girl. "Let's get you in your special outfit for your photos." After a short time, Joy and Sarah appeared again, looming above them as though giants. Being in the huge playpen warped their perspectives. Rachel and Brian found themselves being lifted out. "Let's get you guys ready to be stars," Sarah joked. Meggie was already having her turn in the spotlight, quite literally. With her mother right beside the photographer, Meggie was alone on the studio floor with all the floodlights focused on her. The outfit she'd worn was discarded in a heap by the tripod. Instead, she'd now had a white ribbon tied around the crown of her bald head, a big pink bow affixed to it just above the right of her forehead. She wore that and nothing else. Even her diaper was discarded with her other clothes. She was lying naked on her tummy on a thick white section of shag carpet, long bare legs askew behind her, smooth bum lifted slightly in the air, boobies on display as she craned her neck and gaped at the squeaky ducky toy her mother held. Her blank eyes followed the toy's every movement, and each time it squeaked her face was lit with an open-mouthed grin, which the photographer dutifully caught in photo after photo. "Good girl, Meggie, look at the pretty ducky," Amanda encouraged. Meggie couldn't so much as reach for the toy, or crawl towards it. But she was content to look at it and smile at the funny noise it made anyway. When they'd taken enough shots of that pose, Amanda put away the toy and went to her daughter's side, rolling her onto her back on the carpet. "Good girl, Meggie is a good baby," she cooed. Then she began to tickle Meggie's soles, making the girl giggle as Rachel had at the treatment earlier. Only Amanda was also pedaling Meggie's feet in the air above her. "Look at your tootsies," she sing-songed to the naked woman. Sure enough, Meggie grabbed one of her feet and yanked it back and forth. Amanda stepped back and the photographer snapped shots of her playing with her feet, pulling them back and forth and finally jamming several toes in her mouth to suck on. "There we go. That's my little toe muncher," Amanda announced. "That'll be our next Christmas card." When Meggie finished her toe-sucking session, Amanda got her re-diapered and back in her baby outfit. Now it was going to be one of their turns. The photographer came over and asked who would be next. "Well, let's get the boy out of the way," Sarah stepped up. "If that's okay with you, Joy." "No problem, go ahead." "Okay," the photographer agreed. "Let's get him dressed properly. What do you think? For an infant of his age, I always say just a diaper or nothing at all is cutest." "Okay, let's do it with just his DP, so he doesn't make a mess." The man nodded and went off to prepare his camera. Brian was lowered to the ground and laid powerless while his mama slipped his romper off him. Then he was carried over to the white rug and laid on his tummy. The rug was warm and tickly, but he refused to smile. The last thing he wanted was his humiliation permanently captured on film. He was determined to ruin the photo shoot any way he could. Mama stepped back and the man handed her the ducky. She dutifully began to wave it around, squeaking it playfully. Brian wouldn't play ball so easily. He pointedly refused to even look up at the ducky, lest it actually capture his attention. Instead, he looked intently down at the carpet. If they couldn't see his face, they had no photo. "Come on, sweetie, look at the ducky." Mama called in vain. "Quack quack," she imitated, with no result. Finally she turned to the photographer and shrugged. "I don't know what's wrong with him," she declared. "He's usually very good with strangers. I don't understand why he's so shy all of a sudden. It's okay, miss, I've seen this before. Has he been fed recently? Well, no, he hasn't had his lunch yet, she admitted. Then you should feed him now. That often calms them down, makes them more relaxed. Sarah nodded. Of course, I'll do that right now, thanks. With that she swept Brian back up and carried him out of the shop and into the mall, not bothering to put his romper back on him. Pleased though he was at foiling the photo shoot, he wasn't happy about being taken into the mall in nothing but his diaper. He clung as tightly as he could to Mama, hoping to shield his body from public view. Why are you being so cranky today, little guy? Mama crooned to him. Maybe you are just hungry, she mused. Mama sat down at a bench just down from the studio, swinging Brian's weak, useless legs onto the bench beside her and resting his head in her lap. It was a weird position for him to be in, looking up at her that way. He watched as she undid the buttons on her blouse. What was she doing that for? Brian shrieked when she pulled back the blouse to reveal a nursing bra. Brian squirmed wildly but couldn't get free. She had a firm grip on him to keep her baby from falling, and he didn't have the strength to pull away from her. She seemed quite concerned by her baby's fit, but couldn't understand what was wrong. Sure, it's okay baby, it's okay. Mama's here, Bree, right here, and she's not going anywhere. Brian shook his head, willing her to understand. Bana. Egar, he jabbered incoherently. Here baby, have come to Mama, she said, pulling his head to her breast. Brian shook with revulsion as his mother's bared breast filled his vision. He wouldn't. The breast brushed his cheek and some unknown instinct took over and his head twisted on its own accord until the teat brushed across his lips. They opened and took the brown fleshy bit into his mouth. Once it was there he couldn't stop himself from suckling, just like he did on the pacifier or the BABA. It was better than his binky or BABA in fact. It was warm and soft and felt so natural. The creamy warm liquid that squirted into his mouth was the best tasting thing he could ever remember having. Once taste was all it took to be hooked. Brian suckled on, swallowing a tummyful of Mama's milk. This was Mama inside of him, warming him, providing for him. He could see only the skin of her boob, but it didn't matter, he wasn't thinking about anything, just existing in the moment. Time meant nothing while he was feeding. All he knew was everything was perfect. He was barely awake when the suction was broken. The lovely nipple slipped from between his lips, some milk dribbling down his chin and wetting his chest. Mama closed up her blouse while he lay with his head rested in the crook of her elbow, staring wordlessly up at her, still smiling with delight. He didn't struggle as she lifted him back up and carried him into the studio again. It was only once there that his mind seemed to flick back on and he realized where he was and what he'd just done. Suddenly he wanted to vomit up the milk he'd just drunk. He thought about all the people in the mall who'd passed by and seen him feeding like that. People had actually seen him, a 21-year-old man, feeding at his mother's breast, naked but for a diaper right there in the mall. How could he ever go back to normal after that? And what was worse, he felt a burning desire to do it again. Back inside the studio, the photographer was finishing up with Rachel. She was wearing a big pink bow in her hair now and her romper was gone. Instead she wore a frilly pink tutu and nothing else. She was topless, her breasts bared to the camera as she squirmed on her belly like a fish out of water. She didn't look happy either, but Joy didn't seem to care that the girl wasn't smiling. She was just interested in capturing the cute outfit the baby was in. With the photos done, Rachel was finally stripped of the silly tutu and placed back in the playpen in just her diaper. Now it was again Brian's turn. "How's he doing?" the photographer asked. "Much better, he really calmed down once he got a tummy full of Mama's milk." "Great, let's get started then." "Okay, you know what, I think he'll be happier if we get him free of his DP, so let's make some nudie shots," Mama decided. "Sounds fine, those are always the cutest anyways." Brian shook his head but was completely ignored again. With a couple of rips, his diaper was floating to the ground and he was being deposited on the carpet again, now totally naked. The shaggy material tickled his pee-pee nicely, but that wasn't going to make him forget how embarrassing this was. "Oh, look at his widdle tushy, these are going to be just lovely," Sarah told the photographer. Brian knew when he'd lost the battle. They weren't going anywhere till Mama had her photos. So when she squeaked the stupid toy again, Brian looked up and forced a grin. The camera snapped over and he did his best to hide his weenie. All they'd get was his butt and he could live with that. The cameraman stopped and Brian hoped this was it, but instead he said to Mama, "Would you like some footsies shots like Amanda's girl?" "Oh yes, those are so adorable." "Okay, let's get him on his back and playing with his tootsies." Mama rolled the boy onto his back and then began to pedal his feet, just as Amanda had done to Meggie. But Brian just stared back at her, not amused. "Come on sweetums, look it wiggle, look it those toesies," she crooned. Brian would have crossed his arms if he could have. Instead he remained still, not giving in. "Come on Bree, this little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed home," she sang, playing piggy toes with him. But again this had no effect on him. "Guess he doesn't like his toes much," the photographer shrugged. "Guess not," Mama sighed, releasing his feet. Brian was feeling pretty proud of himself. He'd ruined their photo shoot after all. Not bad for a baby unable to even sit up properly. His moment of pride was short-lived though. It ended as golden liquid arced through the air, splashing Mama and soaking the carpet. He hadn't felt it coming on at all. Suddenly he was tinkling all over the place. Even once it started he couldn't do a thing about it. His bladder had no control whatsoever. All he could do was watch the pee-pee spurting from his naked weenie. "Oh dear," Mama exclaimed. "I'm so sorry," she told the photographer. "No problem at all, happens a lot in this line of business. I'll get it cleaned up when he's done, don't worry yourself. You just get him cleaned up and diapered again." Mama nodded as his pee-pee stream slowed to spurts and then finally stopped. Brian moaned in shame as Mama slipped his diaper under his butt and grabbed some wipes to clean his weenie yet again. And the only thing he could think was, at least it wasn't poopy. Back inside the studio, the photographer was finishing up with Rachel. She was wearing a big pink bow in her hair now and her romper was gone. Instead she wore a frilly pink tutu and nothing else. She was topless, her breasts bared to the camera as she squirmed on her belly like a fish out of water. She didn't look happy either, but Joy didn't seem to care that the girl wasn't smiling. She was just interested in capturing the cute outfit the baby was in. With the photos done, Rachel was finally stripped of the silly tutu and placed back in the playpen in just her diaper. Now it was again Brian's turn. "How's he doing?" the photographer asked. "Much better, he really calmed down once he got a tummy full of Mama's milk." "Great, let's get started then." "Okay, you know what, I think he'll be happier if we get him free of his dear pee, so let's make some nudie shots," Mama decided. "Sounds fine, those are always the cutest anyways." Brian shook his head but was completely ignored again. With a couple of rips his diaper was floating to the ground and he was being deposited on the carpet again, now totally naked. The shaggy material tickled his pee-pee nicely, but that wasn't going to make him forget how embarrassing this was. "Oh, look at his widdle tushy, these are going to be just lovely," Sarah told the photographer. Brian knew when he'd lost the battle. They weren't going anywhere till Mama had her photos. So when she squeaked the stupid toy again, Brian looked up and forced a grin. The camera snapped over and he did his best to hide his weenie. All they'd get was his butt and he could live with that. The cameraman stopped and Brian hoped this was it, but instead he said to Mama, "Would you like some footsies shots like Amanda's girl?" "Oh yes, those are so adorable." "Okay, let's get him on his back and playing with his tootsies." Mama rolled the boy onto his back and then began to pedal his feet, just as Amanda had done to Meggie. But Brian just stared back at her, not amused. Come on sweetums, look it wiggle, look it dose toeses, she crooned. Brian would have crossed his arms if he could have. Instead he remained still, not giving in. Come on Bree, this little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed home, she sang, playing piggy toes with him. But again this had no effect on him. Guess he doesn't like his toes much, the photographer shrugged. Guess not, Mama sighed, releasing his feet. Brain drain. Back home at last, Brian and Rachel were relieved to be out of public view, back in their snug rompers and left to play in Amanda's living room. Baby gates blocked the exits to the room, and nothing small enough to swallow and choke on had been left on the floor. The whole place was now baby-proofed for big infants. All they had to play with were teething rings and rattles. That was enough for the real babies, but Rachel and Brian were quickly bored. Joy noticed the depressed look on Rachel's face as she checked on the babies from the kitchen, where the proper adults were enjoying a cup of coffee together. She slid the baby gate aside and entered the room, crouching by her daughter. "Oh baby, why the long face? You seem so listless today. Are you gassy? Are you coming down with something?" she asked, feeling Rachel's cheek and kissing her forehead. Not warm. Maybe you just need a little love from Mama," she said, rolling Rachel on her back and unsnapping her romper to expose her tummy. Rachel squirmed, uninterested in being played with, her intelligent eyes burning with indignation. But Mama just placed her lips on the exposed tum-tum and blew a big raspberry on it. Rachel kicked her legs and chortled in glee. It just tickled so much. And then Mama did it again. Soon she was rolling on the floor laughing and smiling. "That's better, baby just needed some loving," Joy declared. "I know, let's get you in your bouncer." Rachel was still recovering from her giggles as Mama slipped her romper back off, leaving her in just the thick diaper with its heart prints. Mama scooped her up and carried her over to the door jamb, pushing the baby gate aside and threading her legs through what looked like a big green diaper suspended from the ceiling by elastic straps. The green seat ensconced Rachel's loins and Mama released her. She was suspended in the air, her tippy toes just touching the carpet. "Come on baby, show Mama how you like to jump," Joy urged her. Rachel wiggled experimentally, making the elastic stretch until the soles of her feet were flat on the ground. She enjoyed the sensation of the carpet brushing across her soft soles again, as though she were walking. She gave a slight push from her knees and found herself rising quickly upwards. It was a dizzying and unexpected sensation, like she might just fly right away. Rachel gaped slack-jawed with surprise. "That a girl," Mama praised. She descended with sudden rapidity and her feet connected with the soft carpet, knees bending as her weak legs refused to support her. But the elastic stopped her descent and she pushed off again, back into the air. It was lovely. "What silly, pure fun." Rachel giggled as she bounced up and down in the oversized baby jumper. She didn't even mind that her bared boobies were jiggling about with each landing, giving Brian a good show. She was once again lost in her own little world. And so their afternoon went. Brian drifted off to a midday nap in the giant automatic baby swing, glimmering toys dangling from the canopy above him. Both he and Rachel made poo-piss in their diapers again. It had become so easy to do so, their poop becoming looser, flowing out of their bums with little warning and requiring little effort. They were even becoming accustomed to being changed in front of each other and the other babies. The changing sessions, with their mommies pecking them with kisses, giving them lovely toys and rubbing down their privates with smooth cream and sweet-smelling powder, were actually enjoyable. They almost made the foul-smelling diapers and icky bottoms worth it. By the evening though they were both bored again. Sue was having her turn in the jumper, Danny in the swing, leaving Brian and Rachel to the toys. Meggie was creeping nearby, trying to reach Mama's bag, left by the couch. The diaper-clad woman reached her goal and after a couple attempts succeeded in knocking the bag over with her clumsy hands. So it was that the cursed book made one more appearance. Meggie of course hadn't a clue what it was. She didn't recognize the object before her had completely stolen her life, reduced her to a mindless pooping machine for her mama to care for. She didn't even know it was a book, or for that matter, what a book was. So all she did was chew at the plastic corners. Brian and Rachel, though, knew exactly what Meggie had. Brian had no more interest in the book, though. He was convinced now that it could bring nothing but bad luck, and he had no intention of ever attempting to use it again. With any luck, they'd start to slowly progress, grow back up. Rachel, however, looked at the book with desperation in her eyes. She hadn't been there the last time it changed their lives, only Brian had seen how hopeless it was. Rachel still thought that wretched tome might hold the key to her salvation. Rachel began to creep towards Meggie, a look of wild, almost insane hope in her eye. Brian couldn't believe what she was doing. It was beyond all reason to think that thing could actually help them. As much as he wanted to just ignore it, he couldn't allow Rachel to get her hands on it and then make things even worse. So he too began to creep across the room on his bare tummy, his romper long ago stripped off for ease of diaper changes. The painfully slow race of the two frog-legged scooting young adults proceeded before the bemused eyes of their mentally reduced cohorts. Their diapered bums lifted and dropped and their arms batted at the floor, propelling them along. In the end they reached Meggie at the same time. Rachel seized the book away from the girl, making her pout and whine. Holding it triumphantly up, Rachel tried to reason a way to use it now that she couldn't even speak. How could she exhort it to fix her without a voice to do so? As she pondered this, Brian grasped the other side of the book, shaking his head vigorously at her. Dadu. Rachel babbled angrily, scrunching up her face and pulling at the book with her weak arms. Eeha! Brian screeched back, pulling his own direction. How stupid could she be, he thought to himself. The book sprung open as they pulled at the front and back covers. The plastic stretched, threatening to rip the book in half any second. The book was starting to give way, and a little tear appeared at the top. As soon as it appeared, a green light began to emanate from it, pouring out like radiation in a cartoon. Both Rachel and Brian froze, wondering how much younger they could possibly get. The world didn't shift though, it didn't even freeze. Instead, the greenish light energy seemed to grow outward, towards Brian. With a gasp he pulled his head back, but he was too weak and clumsy to actually make a getaway. The green energy shot into his temple. Rachel watched, petrified, as her last real friend opened his mouth with shock, his eyes wide with terror. The green energy connecting his temple to the book pulsed, growing lighter and darker as though breathing. Brian's terrified eyes glazed over, the fear draining from his face. His jaw loosened, mouth hanging wide open, lips slack. His eyelids drooped slightly as his faraway eyes dulled. His whole face seemed to change before her eyes, his muscles losing their tension. The beam receded, pulling back from Brian's temple. A thick string of drool was hanging from his chin as his gaping mouth formed into a smile. His hands released the book and he dropped back onto his bum, legs splayed wide before him. He appeared almost drunk to Rachel, his head wobbling side to side. He looked at her and stuck his tongue out just between his lips and blew, sending spittle everywhere. He chortled as his spit bubbles popped, then seized his right foot in his hands, pulled it to his face and blinked spellbound at his long wiggling toes before jamming them in his mouth. Rachel felt awful guilt as she looked into his eyes and saw they had become like Meggie's, empty of even a flicker of intelligence. She knew it was all her fault. She never should have been so foolish as to fight with him over the book. Now she'd destroyed his mind and she was all alone. There was no one left to commiserate with, to scheme an escape with. Now Brian was nothing more than little Bree, a dumb little toe muncher no brighter than Meggie. He'd be happy to play with baby toys and poop his diaper for however long they remained this way. Only she would be miserable. In a moment of weakness, of utter despair, Rachel decided she couldn't go on this way alone. She rolled to her back and managed to sit up, though it took considerable effort. She grasped the book in her hands and pulled with all her might, trying to rip it in two. Bree gazed at her with curious incomprehension. The book reacted just as she knew it would. It had worked as planned, though it would likely be the last plan she'd be able to reason and carry out for a long time. The green light shot out of the tear. Rachel paused as the energy sat before her, seemingly analyzing her. Then it blasted into her temple. It wasn't a painful sensation as she'd imagined it would be. It felt like warm marshmallow pumping into her head through her temple. Warm and gooey, it trickled through her head, invading every crevice, making her thoughts sticky, slowing them down. It was quickly becoming hard to think, yet she felt comforted, warm, almost happy. Speech centers tingled, words blasting through her mind, then went dark, leaving her instantly wordless, her thoughts reduced to images. All the objects in her field of vision lost their names in an instant. Without words she couldn't describe what they did, all her memories were in words. Suddenly she couldn't understand what anything was. It was not a pleasant feeling, total and utter confusion. But mercifully it was short-lived. The confusion dulled as her memories scrambled and disappeared. All her recollections of college, of high school, elementary school, growing up, riding a bike, swimming, driving a car, were wiped away in an instant. She still knew she was a grown-up and that she knew all the people in this room, but she had no idea what being a grown-up meant or how she knew them. A sensation of indescribable pleasure washed away the rest of her confusion as her brain simplified, her higher thought processes shutting down and taking away all her inhibitions, her fears, her worries. Rachel no longer minded being naked, but for her diaper, she wouldn't have minded being completely naked. She no longer had the ability to feel embarrassed, or to worry about the future. Brain cells were slaughtered by the million, but Rachel didn't miss her reasoning abilities as they left her. Because as soon as they were gone, she didn't know she'd ever possessed such amazing thinking abilities. In the final seconds, as Rachel's final IQ points disappeared, she lost her sense of past and future and even her sense of identity. She wouldn't even recognize herself in the mirror anymore. She could not plan, could not think ahead. If an object left her field of vision, it ceased to exist for her. Finally, the gooey warm marshmallow tickling her brain slipped back out of her temple, the green light disappearing into the book, leaving her mind empty, a clean slate. Rachel gazed at the person facing her and wondered who he was. Warm liquid tracked down her front side. She ignored it. The person, Rachel was no longer aware of distinctions like he and she, was sucking its toes. Rachel copied it, pulling her foot to her mouth and suckling the toeses. She didn't really comprehend the wiggly things were a part of her, but it felt nice to suckle. It made her feel something in her tummy, like she was eating. It gave her a sense of comfort. She felt her slobber dribble down the sole of her foot and it tickled. She liked that. Warm stuff poured out of her, she felt relieved, relaxed down below. It made her warm all around the puffy thing she wore. She forgot all about the toes, only focused on what she was thinking about right now. The warm feelings in the diaper made her happy. She was a very happy baby. ***. Joy entered the playroom that evening to check on the babies and immediately shook her head. "Geese, I can't leave you two alone for 2 seconds, can I?" she declared. Brian had gotten out of his diaper again and was splayed naked across the floor with his poopy bum presented to her. Hearing her voice, he craned his neck around and gaped, smiling up at her. Rachel was sat in a blue bumbo right before him, and at least she was still in her diaper. She looked up at her mama with wide baby eyes, chewing away at the corner of her baby book, slobbering all over the poor thing's cover. Joy clucked her tongue and told her, "Honey, I hope you like to read books someday as much as you like to eat them now." Rachel yanked the book out of her mouth, a string of drool still connecting it to her lips, which she pursed to blow bubbles at Mama. Joy gently removed the wet book from the baby's hands so it could be cleaned up. Rachel let it go, already forgetting about it as she babbled, "Da-doo-ba, ah-hee-hoo," in cheerful tones. "Yes, sweetie, I'm sure," Rachel replied, pretending to understand the baby's senseless blather. Brian continued to grin up at her with that endearing toothless smile of his, and Joy decided the poopy-bummed jaybird could wallow happily in his filth for another minute while she disposed of the well-chewed book. Joy carried it out to the kitchen by 2 fingers, trying not to touch the slobber coating much of it. Then she tossed it in the trash bin. Who gave Bree such a silly toy, she wondered aloud, heading back to fit the boy with a clean diaper. What she couldn't see as the trash bin lid closed, was the book take on a strange glow one last time before disappearing into thin air. This world had been sufficiently warped, now it was time to change a new world, a new dimension. It would take time to build up power, of course, but then it was more than just a book, and it had all the time in the universe. And so a newly reformed black leather copy of a literary classic appeared once again in the dusty stacks of a prestigious library. And there it would stay, not until someone came looking for it,